Hello there, vinyl community. Today I thought we would take a quick look at a band, uh, someone I've really liked since the time I was a teenager. They've always kind of been there for me, and were there when I was first discovering punk and metal, and I guess they've always kind of stayed there. And in some ways, it's my favorite, rock-orientated band. And that is the band Pere Ubu. A couple of their early singles. These aren't so easy to find anymore. One of them is just a pivotal, Heart of Darkness, absolute must-have. And on the flip side, 30 Seconds Over Tokyo. Both sum up the band perfectly. They are aggressive, but full of dark, creeping atmosphere, and lyrically very literate and literary. And their Pere Ubu was always, Dave Thomas, who was the leader of the band, was always trying to make music that had a social commentary aspect to it. The band was from Cleveland, Ohio, and began in 1975. And it was right around that time, that 1975, when Cleveland, Ohio, and Detroit, Michigan, and the Midwestern states really began their economic decline. And I think that's well reflected in the music. The music is kind of post-industrial, desolate, isolated, but aggressive, with lots of slashing, angular sounds in the guitar. And there's usually a lot of ambient background distortion in some of their tracks. It's a real distinctive sound, and they really charted out that area for themselves. And those early singles have to be heard. They're an important part of, as important as Public Image Limited, Metal Box, or any of that. And you can hear those. The best way to find them is to get this. This contains all the early singles, along with all the B-sides. And you won't. These are vital tracks if you want to discover this band, to understand where they're coming from and the uniqueness of their sound. This is a pivotal vibe, and I think it can still be had pretty. Pere Ubu never became kind of the band du jour. They never became too hip, and unlike, say, maybe I'd compare them in some ways to Sonic Youth. Sonic Youth just became hip on a much bigger level. Nothing wrong with Sonic Youth. I'm a big fan, but Pere Ubu never really broke out of their cult following. And they did attempt to. They tried to, but it just never really happened. And I'd say, so the early singles, and then the first two albums, which are Modern Dance and Dubhausen. And these are dark, post-punk, and they are a real sonic journey. And it's the kind of music that requires, I think, your time to devour them the way they need to be. The lyrics need to be understood. There's a lot of literary references, and there's also a lot of, and I always think this gets left behind with this band, is there's a lot of humor in their music. Dave Thomas wrote, he had a very biting sense of humor, and there was always that element in the music, just when things were getting a little too heavy or a little too serious, and they could be, because they were taking on some within the darkness of those songs, I think, taking on some really important themes. But there was always humor on his part, done at just the right moments to lighten things up a little bit. So that's kind of those are the kind of, I think, the building blocks of understanding the band. They went on through the 1970s up until 1980, recording a series of very, very good albums. Third one, maybe my favorite one, Picnic Time, great record. New guitar player, but I think the rest of the band was pretty much the same. And then went on, and I think Tenement Years was 1980, and I think 1979, 1980, something like that. And I think there's one other record that's not here in my collection right now. But by the time they got to 1980, the band was kind of aching to achieve to break out of the cult status that they had been relegated to. And so they went ahead and tried to, their sound was always vaguely similar to Talking Heads. So think of the Talking Heads like early Talking Heads, like Psycho Killer and before, the earlier CBGB years, and the sound that the band had, that really raw, rudimentary, angular sound that the Talking Heads had. And that's vaguely what Pere Ubu did, but with much more. I think they did it much better. There was a lot more atmosphere, and they were a lot more literate than the Talking Heads would go on to be. But that's kind of a good comparison. So the band wanted some commercial success, so they did a series of records that are actually very, very good. Where they tried to have some commercial breakout. The song Waiting for Mary actually got some MTV play. I vaguely remember it being played on like 120 minutes. If you're from the States and you're familiar with MTV, early MTV, there was a show called 120 Minutes where they would show, quote, alternative music. And I believe this got shown on there. Back in those days, it was 120 minutes, and then I think on Saturday nights it was Headbangers Ball, which seemed like two worlds away from each other, but those were probably the two best shows that MTV ever had. So after this record, they carried on. They tried for further. I think the next 3 records tried to have this commercial. They went Polygram, if I'm not mistaken, in the States, and they tried to achieve some alternative hits, and it never really happened. I think Waiting for Mary is as close as it came. And then after that, I think they realized that they were going to be relegated to cult status, and gave up on the commercial pursuits. Plus, the record label wasn't going to carry them any longer. And they carried on that way through the 1990s into the 2000s, doing a series of really, really fine albums, all of which are worth your time in investigating. In 2016, 2017, 2018, Dave Thomas, singer and leader, became very ill, and like so ill where many people didn't think he was going to make it. And to everyone's surprise, in 2019, and remember here now we're like, COVID, and the band releases an album. And I remember hearing about it and going, wow, it's out of nowhere almost. And we didn't think we were going to get any more music from them. And here comes this album that is actually one of the best things that they've ever released. Very different, but still perfectly Pere Ubu. And that album is this one, The Long Goodbye. The title alone, I think, says something about here Dave Thomas is with, very sick and still carrying on to make music and releasing an album like The Long Goodbye, which is also a reference to the 1970s movie, Philip Marlowe detective movie, excellent movie, and the track listing plays like an alternative soundtrack to A Long Goodbye. There's a lot of what's different about this record is that unlike their other music, this relies very heavily on electronics. And if you haven't heard it, somebody who's into like electronic music and really, really, modern, bold, modern music, should give this a listen to, because all of the things that the band hinted at electronically earlier on in their career all kind of come together here. It was kind of done intentionally because Dave Thomas was not in any position to make the kind of music that they used to make. And so out of necessity, they found a new way of communicating. It's very different and yet perfectly Pere Ubu. And the songs on it have a theme, and it's not going to seem, it's bleak. And it's a criticism of, specifically, of American empire and the decline that we see happening. The decline of, he seems to single out San Francisco and what seems to be happening throughout California, but also traveling through the country as a place where if you were to travel through the United States, instead of seeing a country, I think, that's on the move and moving forward, unfortunately, there are town after town, particularly in the Midwest, that have just become ghost towns, just shells of what they used to be, because the jobs are gone. Not just the jobs, but the wages, and there's a definite lack of hope in the community. And I think this album sums a lot of that up very, very well. It's all about dealing with the end coming. All about holding your head high and maintaining your own personal dignity when the end seems near. And I think he means that in a way, in his own personal struggles, which he has gone on to. He's still alive and still making music, and he's done that. But it's more than that. It's a criticism of the state of the empire and where we're at today. And while it doesn't always make for cheerful listening, it certainly makes for interesting listening. And it's a real, I think, indictment on the American system. So that's kind of you can kind of see that from Bay City. At the end of the album, he talks about how everything ends up in Bay City. Bay City being kind of he talks about traveling through the country and always throughout his whole life seeing the road ahead. And every time he came to a town, it was, at this stop you can get off at the city of the future, Bay City. And then he would go on more and he'd come to another, and it was always the same exit. There was never a new exit. And when he comes to the end of it, he finally gets off on the exit, and now his fast car and shiny car is an old beat up piece of junk, and he's older and realizes that you were always going to end up in Bay City, that's where the road ended. And it's some really interesting lyrics. I suggest you grab it. This is a great record, and one I think you're probably not going to hear about that often, but that I think deserves, and sonically it's just a great listen, because there's a lot of interesting things going on here musically that I just would have never imagined Pere Ubu still had in them to make an album this adventurous and this intriguing. It's a real statement. Anyway, one of my favorite bands, and one I just wanted to share with y'all. And thanks